Hey guys, it's Dr. Minardi here, bringing you all things STEM. From my journey to yours, we are on an adventure together. Today, we have the awesome opportunity to speak to someone who has worked in the government and who has spent a variety of different ways in her career doing a lot of different things. So let's welcome to the stage, Olivia. Hey, Olivia, how's it going?
Hi, Greta. I'm doing well and excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. We're excited to have you. So, Olivia Gonzalez is an economist at the U.S. Small Business Administration, or SBA, in the Office of Strategic Management and Enterprise Integrity, where she conducts regulatory economic analyses, supports the evaluation of SBA programs, and leverages data and evidence as strategic assets to drive decisions. That is exciting. I'm pumped to learn more. She co-leads the SBA's Evidence and Evaluation Community of Practice, which is intended to promote a culture of learning and evidence-based decision-making throughout the agency. Olivia has over 10 years of experience in researching and analyzing macroeconomic and microeconomic data from diverse sources, developing metrics, and synthesizing research in professional journal articles, research papers, and briefings. Before the SBA, Olivia worked on national statistics at the Bureau of Economic Analysis and public policy analysis at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, or GMU. Olivia is also a part-time PhD candidate at GMU and is exploring the economics of discrimination using advanced econometric methods in her dissertation. She earned her BS and MA degrees in economics from GMU. She also holds an AS in business administration from the Northern Virginia Community College. Olivia was a Frederick Bastiat Fellow at the Mercatus Center from 2019 to 2022 and received the American Planning Association's Holzheimer Memorial Student Scholarship in 2017 for her work in home-based business regulations. Olivia also serves as a board member of the JP Innovation Project, a nonprofit that helps connect high-needed youth with education and training opportunities in the tech field. Olivia has published research on economic development, fiscal, and zoning policies. Although her research interests are widespread, she is ultimately very passionate about evidence-based policy, economic education, and analyzing how public policies influence equity. And so with that, we are so excited to have you today, Olivia. And obviously, you've done a tremendous amount of work in your career, but tell us a little bit about Olivia as a person beyond the bio.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much for the great introduction, Karina. I'm honored to be here and talk with you about my journey. I definitely think that I've taken an unconventional route in my career as I figured out what I wanted to do along the way. So I'm excited to talk about that some more. And then as far as beyond the bio, I would say I'm a very curious person, and that probably leads to a lot of the widespread research interests, But outside of that, really love family, spending time with family. That great outdoors is how I unplug. I'm in my head a lot day to day behind a computer screen. So a lot of my outside hobbies rely on like helping to disconnect and reconnect with my body. I've been really into Tai Chi this past year. And so I care a lot about like mindfulness and connecting with others, So although my resume might point to a lot of, intellectual pursuits within the economics field broadly, I just day to day, I care a lot outside of that, just, seeing what I can to connect with my family and people in my community. So yeah, and, excited to talk more about different aspects of that.
No, I love that. And so I guess the second question that leads me to is, how did you get introduced to economics? And is it from, there's different lenses. Is it experiential? Is it community-based? Is it personal? I'm just curious because you obviously have a really diverse background, but it all kind of points directly to a funnel of economics.
Yeah, great question. I probably have a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is, I can get into the long answer here in a second if you want, but the short answer is I originally didn't know about like the potential route of economics when I graduated from high school, for example. took a really roundabout journey, found it along the way, and just fell in love with it as a framework for studying human behavior. I also had a lot of family members growing up that ran their own businesses. I still do. And so originally I thought I was going to be running my own business, like possibly as a graphic designer, which is very different, as you can imagine. So now I'm getting into the long answer, where basically along the way I pivoted to economics, basically. More specifically, I think what contributed to that was when I was in high school, I actually, even though growing up when I was younger, I was really drawn to STEM fields like biology and science and math. I actually didn't find out till later that I have like ADHD and dyslexia. So I actually felt for a long time that that wasn't a route for me. Every time I took a math class, for example, as I got up to calculus in high school and then college, I just really struggled and didn't find the right learning style yet. And so meanwhile, I really loved art in high school. And so it just seemed like a more natural path for me. And so when I went to community college first, I used that time to kind of figure things out a bit, but it was still, the main plan was to study graphic design. I accidentally stumbled upon economics while deciding to pivot to a business administration degree. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. This isn't just about money. Like, and it's not as scary as like, because it can come across as scary, I think. Scary in the sense that like, there's all these like opaque models that happen are involved with economic theory that without the right teacher, I think can be intimidating. And so I would say my journey is a result of just trying to be open to discovery along the way, finding the right teachers that really made me realize, oh, wow, I'm not necessarily bad at math. It just, I needed the right teachers to help connect the dots. And then I realized, oh, this is actually a helpful language to really try to get at the more important questions of like, what motivates people, you know, which is another reason why along the way I started really connecting with like economic sociology, which is more of an intersection, I would say, of like the methodologies you see within economics, of econometrics. And but yeah, now I'm starting to get into some weeds, but like that's a high level ish of the journey I've been on, and definitely not, you know, perfectly linear. Had to try out a lot of different things along the way. Community college was super helpful in that. And so, yeah, even when hearing you read my bio, I like look back and I was like, sometimes day to day right now, I forget the long journey I've been on. And it's been a challenging, but very rewarding journey.
But it's also, you know, I'm a huge fan of reflection and reflective activities. I think to your point around mindfulness, around taking a step back and go, wow, and just appreciate the journey.
Right.
Not only that it has taught you a variety of different things, but also that, you know, it's taken a lot to get you to the point that you are at. And I don't think a lot of people do that commonly. You've talked a lot about a lot about a lot of things. So I kind of want to parse them out a little bit. You know, you talked about learning style, right? And you know, when I think of economics, I think about mathematics, and I didn't think about it in that way at first. So I took, you know, a variety of different calc classes, calc-based physics, all of that. And then when I got into my second master's and I was looking at macroeconomics, I failed the first two exams. And I just couldn't understand it because it was broaching the topic of, okay, mathematical trends, and then you talk about sociological or psychological sort of behavioral. And it finally dawned on me literally 2 weeks before the final, perfect timing, right? Just deconstruct it as a math problem. And if you actually deconstruct it as a math problem, and so that's when when you were talking about learning styles, I can value that, because that's exactly how I had to reframe essentially an entire semester of macroeconomics. So I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, and that's thanks for sharing that, because I think when I talk to others about economics, when it's not their traditional like main focus of what they're doing in their career, I've heard very similar stories of we can all come at it from different directions. I'm actually probably the inverse of you a bit, because each time I tried to learn calculus, in high school and college, even once I decided to pivot to economics, I still struggled with calculus quite a bit. And I found that, oh, wait, all of the examples that my teachers had used before, at least the ones I interacted with, used physics problems. Like, if you throw a thing up into the air, this is oversimplification, but can you calculate the rate of the which it's falling, things like that. And something about my brain, the way my brain works, I actually just couldn't connect with that super well. But then when I started seeing calculus examples that were more applied to economics, like optimization problems for businesses, like how to optimize profit subject to constraints, this is more of micro direction, but it comes up in macroeconomics as well. But so I remember having a great calculus teacher in undergrad who was very receptive to feedback on what examples he was bringing up. And that's when it clicked for me. And I said, oh, would you mind using some economics problems when teaching these certain concepts? And that really helped along the way. And so, yeah, that's what really came up for me when you were describing that. And so it's interesting that maybe you were coming from the opposite direction of learning about how to, even if economics isn't your field, to kind of wrap your head around it and enjoy it more. Whereas with having more physics related problems, for example, and then I came from the other direction. And so, yeah, but that's I think the important takeaway from that is that we all learn differently. And that might be one of the things I keep harping on. And I think that's another reason why along my journey, I think I tried to pay attention to to learn about myself along the way, which meant also if I had a bad experience with a particular subject, always being open to trying it again. Some people say, oh, I'll try anything once. I almost feel like we need to, as we're learning about ourselves, especially through our college ages, I'll try everything at least 2 to 3 times. And that's kind of how I figured out, wait, maybe I can do this economics thing. And of course, the math journey was still the main growth area along the way, but it helped at least knowing that it wasn't because of a deficit on my part that helped reshift my framework. Kind of, it sounds like you shifted yours as well for that class. So it sounded like it turned out for the better by the end of that exam.
It did. I actually I really blew the final out of the water. Nice. But it was because I did that. And I love what you were connecting, because that's exactly where the directionality that I was going in is that not everyone has the same learning styles. And so when you are a teacher, you have the opportunity to present different sort of theories and methodologies around solving problems, but not everyone is going to actually uptake those in the same exact way. And so you have to present them in different ways in order to actually land it with your students, for a lack of a better reason. But I do want to talk a little bit about and shift gears to the framework of economics, because I think harkening back to what I originally said, is that folks associate it really, really stringently with mathematics, but there's such a human adaptability to it, and usability, and way in which it relates to people, and what they do. The coolest class that I actually got the opportunity to take was it was behavioral economics, and so it was all about why did prohibition fail so epically? What is it about vaping and the tax associated with vaping, and how does it impact society? All of those things that you think of are, sociological in nature, but they are driven by economic policies. So I was just hoping that you could comment a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's really neat that you had that experience with that, because I think I often point to behavioral economics actually as a great way to entryway to learning about economics at any level, right? Because behavioral economics, I think, brings in a lot of psychology as well into kind of bolstering our understanding of what motivates people in combination with economic frameworks. And so it's interesting because different textbooks will have different explicit definitions of what economics is. There's many different schools of thought. Which we can get into different weeds of that if we wanted, but we don't, that could be a whole different podcast. So I feel like, well, for me, when it comes all down to, though, is economics is a study of how people make choices, how they respond to incentives to make decisions, how to optimize what they care about subject to the constraints around them, right? And so like you could put that in more technical terms or not. There, mathematical economics, if you move in that direction, yes, there's a lot more math, but it's literally just trying to put in the mathematical language how we operate. And so I'd say, a journey you go on as an economist is trying to figure out what kind of economist you are. And I think I'm probably a blend of a lot of different schools of thought. And so, but for me, again, it all comes down to that basic definition that I think most schools would agree with. And then I'm a really big fan of like applied econometrics as my framework, because using a lot of what I learned in undergrad and even grad school about like the psychology behind people, which requires taking an interdisciplinary approach, I think that can still really enrich kind of taking a more econometric approach, which I would say is like more statistical than mathematical, but it is important to know the mathematical underpinnings of like how it's operating. But part of that requires a bit of fluidity along the way of, for all these models we have in economics of human behavior, being open to relaxing different assumptions we have about like self-interest and, perfect knowledge or information when you're making decisions. Some of these might be familiar from when you took your intro classes, right? And so I've always been attracted to economists and schools of thought that allow for that like complexity of human behavior, and that like if you could say I'm self-interested when I go out into the market or interact with other people, but my calculation of how I'm self-interested could still be quite informed by altruism and how I care about my peers and the people in my community. And I think that's a really important thing that that's lost sometimes is in very intro econ courses, because they kind of have to start with the strictest model sometimes. And almost like throughout undergrad, I've heard this joke that studying economics is like you show up freshman year and they teach you, here's all these models of what we understand about human behavior. Okay, and you're like, okay, I'm following. I'm like kind of confused along the way, but I get there eventually. Second year, sophomore, like, okay, forget everything you knew. We actually have to relax all these assumptions, and this is what it's more like. And then you go through that at like almost every year until you graduate. It's hyperbolic to an extent, but I think that's kind of the journey I went on. And then so at the end of the day, you kind of, as a practitioner or economist day to day, it's like there's these principles of human behavior that I kind of anchor myself to, but then leaving room for outliers and like, when I say outliers, extreme situations where maybe even for me in my journey, like on paper, it looks like kind of all over the place at first, but I had to learn a lot along the way. And I guess what I'm just trying to say, human behavior is complex. And I think I am excited about a lot of progressions broadly within the economics field. Seems to be, especially in behavioral economics, is leaving more room for that. Economics sociology, leaving room for complex motivations and what drives people. Yeah, I hope that, yeah, I can kind of get carried away sometimes because I'm very passionate about it. And I think, especially when I know you mentioned earlier, I care a lot about economic education. Even though I'm not a professor, I do think that like economics gets a bad rap sometimes. And sometimes that's connected to the way it's taught along the way. And I think, but the field is improving, I think, as a whole.
Well, what I love about, I think, all STEM fields is the ability to quantitate and my dog is whining. I don't know why. Okay.
She want to join us, or they want to join us?
She's been doing this the last 24 hours, and I don't know what's going on. Okay. So what I love is in STEM fields, there's a quantitative aspects and then a qualitative aspect. And it's not singular, it's obviously multiple. But, how do you sort of quantify those qualitative aspects? And that's what I learned to appreciate in economics.
I love that. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's why when someone says they're an economist, there can be so many different kinds of economists. There are some economists that focus a lot on just the qualitative aspects and go to collect interviews, surveys, case study approaches that help account for very like complex qualitative information. And then there's more quantitative economists. And I like both. I'd say probably developing more of an econometrics specialty, but I think regardless of what kind of economist you are, I think you have to leave room for both, because at some point you have to define the variables you're trying to measure. And like, for example, in the case of like trying to account for, cultural factors, like it's pretty established by now in like applied econometrics, historical economics fields, that, culture really matters in how society runs. It's not just as simple as, oh, I'm going to go change this rule about how society is governed and just look at the budget, the numbers, the economy. But at the same time, you can't just put a variable that's a proxy for all of culture into an equation, right? So it's kind of like where those things connect is tricky sometimes, but I definitely think they have to inform each other, right? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree, and it complexifies the area, but it also gives it a lot of allure, because you don't have to necessarily be regulated to one aspect or another. And depending on your research project or the program that you're trying to assess, you might dip into a little bit more qualitative, or you might stick to a little bit more quantitative. It's highly dependent, right? And so if there's also a way of which you're not relegated to specifically to a certain aspect.
Right.
So let's actually, given sort of that philosophy and the discussion around the philosophy, can you tell us a little bit about, your current job, your current opportunity, and even like, what is a day in the life of Olivia?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, I really enjoy my job. I've been at the SBA for, I think, 2.5 years now. And I absolutely love it. I have great colleagues, and I'd say you might have already got this from me already, but like I like diversity in what I'm working on. So like I think that my current job really allows for that. For example, I was and I still am. I was hired to be an economist primarily to work on cost benefit analysis. So looking at any new rule that the SBA issues. Reviewing and or writing the like associated economic analysis that goes with it. There's a lot of like federal guidance and requirements that for any new rule or regulation that comes out, there has to be a supplementary economic analysis that shows that decision makers look at all the potential costs and benefits that would likely result from the rule requirements that are proposed, right? And so there's a whole process in the rulemaking process involved with that it's pretty complex and I'm still learning, right? But and I do, that's like the majority of my job, I'd say, is I still work on that. But because I have a great team that's very interdisciplinary, which I love, I work with data scientists, program evaluators, work with lawyers sometimes as well on the rules we work on. And right away, I became very attracted to the field of program evaluation, which I hadn't really known much before joining the SBA. But with my background in like policy analysis, generally speaking, I'm very passionate about studying, seeing how I can apply my economics framework and field to real world problems. And so when I started chatting more with my colleagues who are program evaluators, who get more into like actual studies, like of trying to evaluate our programs historically. And, even if there was a program that was discontinued, is there anything we can learn about how that was implemented for future programs? For programs we have currently going, how can we study different systematic, even if incremental changes to help our program participants more, or open it up to other people who more underserved people. So I'd say along the way, I got more involved in like assisting our program evaluators with studies that we would conduct either internally, or we also contract them out a lot. And so I eventually got certified as a contracting officer representative. So now I get to lead. When I say lead, it's mostly coordinate. Like I help design studies for areas that we are looking for more answers to for a particular program, maybe a set of programs that have a similar feature. And then I help coordinate with contractors who are actually implementing the study. So there's a bit of research I still get to do internally, implying generally like social science frameworks to understanding how to improve our programs, generally speaking. And then since we've built out our data science arm only in the last couple of years as well, I get to collaborate with the data scientists a lot more too, who are, so all of these things, like as you can imagine, interact a lot. And so I'd say day to day, I get to do a little bit of each of these. I'd say some days I'll get a request from a program to review the economic analysis they've already written for a rule. I'll review that, provide comments with my team, run it by somebody else, like my director. We have started working with students more. I'm very excited about getting to work with a group of students this upcoming year from, I think it's the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown. So I'm going to get to work with a group of students on one of our research questions that sometimes, I mentioned we work with contractors, and now we're also starting to work with students to give them opportunities to work on questions that could really help us, but we just don't have the capacity to work on ourselves right now. And yeah, going to meetings. I can tell you about the community of practice that I help lead to, which is more of like professional development monthly luncheon series where I get to just pause for a second on all the work we're working on together at the agency and learn from a speaker on a topic. So yeah, it's a really good, diverse type of environment when it comes to what I'm working on, as well as methodologically, you get to work with a lot of different people with different backgrounds and different perspectives. And this does connect back to what you were saying earlier about, and what we were discussing about, for any particular question you have, in any context probably, but especially in government, when you're running programs or looking at policy improvements, it's, what's that saying? Like if you view every problem as a nail, you're going to always use a hammer or something. Whereas maybe not every problem is the same. So you have to like approach each problem differently is what I'm trying to say. And so when you have an interdisciplinary team, different people can speak up like, well, maybe machine learning would be helpful in this area. Or another person can be like, well, actually, I think that's over, like maybe a different solution than we need. What about we try this more qualitative approach, things like that. And so through that, I get to learn a lot from my colleagues, and I get to also bring up ideas of how to approach things given my like interdisciplinary economist background. So I hope that gives a good overview. Some of it's high level, some of it's like day to day. And at the end of the day, I think what matters to me almost the most, aside from feeling like I'm working on something that matters, is like having a very collaborative team that's builds each other up and is open to ideas and feedback. And yeah, so yeah, I'm very grateful to be where I'm at right now.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So what I liked around your discussion right there, I like the whole thing, frankly, but what is really fascinating to me is I've had a few product managers on this podcast, and I see a comparator in that, product managers are always looking for the next best thing. How do we do product development? How do we think about the future of the product? How does it fit in with competitive analysis? And so there's a very comparative line between that and this, in that, you want to see how effective your policies are. You want to see how effective your programs are. What is the success rate? Why did you implement it the way you did? What is the feedback loop? And that's all, it's not economics, particularly in product, but you are still using quantitative and qualitative data around what are your what is the user experience? How are they using it? How does it facilitate their efficiencies? All of that. And so there's a great deal, between comparisons. And I think that's really awesome, though, that there is that fiduciary sort of alignment on analysis, but also, effectiveness too.
Definitely. Yeah. That's a really interesting comparison. And I haven't heard that because obviously I'm not in private sector, but I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I honestly think any environment where you're trying to optimize something, which you have to get on the same page with your teammates and your organization, what you're trying to optimize, subject to constraints, like you're thinking like an economist. I mean, you're also thinking that's human behavior, right? But I think when you study economics, you get especially attuned to different things like incentives and thinking about priorities, subject to, and like trade-offs when you're approaching any particular problem. How do you improve on things subject to the constraints you're facing, right? And you can always work on changing the constraints, right? Whether that's through funding or different things like that. But I like that a lot. And I think, I was just reflecting on that a little bit. I think, I like that comparison a lot.
Yeah, and I think there also is, to take it one step further, when you talk about the economics, it's a huge thing in private industry and private sector is return on investment, right? Your customer is purchasing something. And so what is their return on investment? There's always that conversation that has to be had. And I highly liken it to the public sector in that, you're instituting a policy and what is the return on investment of that policy? And that is a huge economic sort of story to tell, if you will.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And it's that calculus, if you will, like takes place in both public and private sector, but then the incentives or the institutional structure just changes. So that's what you have to take into consideration, right? But the underlying way, I think broadly that we work as humans, I guess, is still trying to optimize subject to constraints, but those constraints might differ by context, right? So one thing we struggle a lot with in government is like we don't have like prices and profit signals like the private sector has, like and other incentive structures that you have in private industry for understanding what the ROI is. So in government, that means trying to figure out, at least from my perspective, which I wanted to add, I didn't say earlier, but all of the things I discussed here today, this is the required disclaimer, are my own views and do not reflect the views of my organization. But that is that the role of trying to figure out who your customer is, right? Which is, at the end of the day, is the public. For our agency, it's small businesses. And I always try to like anchor myself to that day to day, because in a way, who we work with, different programs are intermediate clients, but that we service in our work day to day, and maybe in the private sector, it's your coworkers and your board, things like that. But this is just a roundabout way of saying that, like, I do think about these things often, and because we don't have similar feedback loops in government, we still have to be very open to, well, how do we collect information and feedback from the public about how something is running? And so we mentioned qualitative and quantitative approaches, and it can be a struggle sometimes. But in the case, I'll give a specific example. In the rulemaking process, for the rules that I work on, ideally, for each proposed rule that goes on, there's usually an open comment period for the public that the agency and other agencies do the same thing to try to collect feedback on how things are going. And then, when you publish the final rule, you take a look at the public comments and you try to tweak, your original plans subject to maybe perspectives you didn't think about originally. So all these different things are just me trying to say that day to day, we're trying to think about return on investment from like the perspective of, does this program help people in the same way we intended? Does this program maybe have unintended effects we didn't think about? But it just requires a lot of work because, again, we don't have the same feedback loops in government. And so public comment period, just that's also where qualitative work comes in to try to account for multiple perspectives. So those are some things that came up for me when you mentioned that. But
No, that's totally fascinating. I think it's spot on. It's like the frameworks are similar, but then the assumptions are
Mhm.
different, and then the working sort of sessions are different.
Mhm.
We are nearing the end of our time, but I do want to ask you about the JP Innovation Project
Yeah.
and your affiliation with that, and what is that as a nonprofit, and all of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking about that. That's something I got involved with a couple years ago when a friend of mine from undergrad that I studied economics with, actually, her Rachel and her husband Aaron started this nonprofit because um, Aaron's brother, unfortunately, it's inspired by his brother that he lost in the early 2000s. That James, who it's inspired by, was really clever, uh, uh, passionate young man for tech related. He was really getting into computers, sports, and he had a lot in front of him, basically. And so the purpose of this nonprofit is very much inspired by him and how he approached his life, but trying to raise money for high need youth, excuse me, to get connected to different opportunities that can hopefully down the line connect them to be entryways to the tech field, tech and innovation field. And so it's been several years now, and we're growing little by little. We're mostly directing funds to different programs that we're passionate about. So, for example, the Keystone Science School, we provided funding for some of their programs in empowering young women in underserved communities. We have also helped a couple of different programs like that. And so, yeah, I help with their fundraising. And I think similarly, having lost someone in my family to cancer, as how James was lost, I think I'm very passionate about their project to help people. And so it's a combination of helping to, tell James's story, but also help underserved youth that may not have other ways to get into the tech field. So it's all volunteer based right now, but I think we're ramping up slowly more and more each year, raising funds, redirecting it, and then in the long term, hoping to run our own program. So I'm very excited to be on their board and help them out with that.
No, that's awesome. And I did want to at least give the opportunity for you to speak about, what it is, how it is, and
Mhm.
what it's impacting. So that's awesome. So my last question for today's episode
Mhm.
is the last question that I always tend to ask our guests. But if you were to think 10 years back, 15 years back, what words of wisdom would you have imparted to yourself
Mhm.
uh, back then?
Mhm. It's a good question. And I do like to reflect a lot. So I think that it's tough to answer because I think it's a combination for me of saying, you know, uh, keep doing what you're doing in a way, because hindsight's always 20, and I can look back and you know but at the same time, I feel like I would recommend to other people, to not be too hard on yourself, um, to keep aligning yourself to what you feel drawn to professionally and personally, right? And then if you hit roadblocks that make you feel like you have any sort of deficit, like, oh, maybe I'm not smart enough to do this, or um, maybe I was all wrong about my dream of what I want to do. Maybe you do want a career pivot, but maybe you just haven't had the right teacher or the right environment to really approach something. So try everything more than once. um, Reach out for resources online. There's so much more available online today than when I was younger, and other people for learning different learning styles, right? So yeah, so like I appreciate that. And so I just, yeah, just being open to things. And again, all of this still be anchored to you listening to yourself and what makes you excited. And then just, again, it's okay if your path isn't linear. Just, yeah, lean on your family, not lean on your friends, and you'll be surprised what you discover along the way. So. Mhm.
You'll be surprised as to how strong you are too.
Exactly. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
Well, with that, Olivia, this has been a fabulous conversation talking about economic principles,
Mhm.
frameworks, what you do with the SBA. I value you. You're a force to be reckoned with. We didn't talk about your PhD, but that's okay. We talked about other stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's also still in progress, but happy to check in later. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
absolutely.
Yeah. And thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure. And then I just hope that things that I share can help, other students who are navigating their journey.
No, I appreciate that. And that's exactly the intent. So
Mhm.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.
At STEM From, we are working towards making all STEM careers achievable regardless of your identity, background, or even access to resources. Here at STEM From, we will introduce you to all things STEM, whether they be careers, research, tips and tricks, or even inspiration. Thanks all for watching and learning with us today. And don't ever forget to ask yourselves, where do you want your journey to stem from? Bye, everyone.